Okay, so now we are on to our next spotlight, the second spotlight for today, the entrepreneurial value chain approach. Do we have our panelists on the line? Moderator, panelists, Elizabeth, Gordon, Amma, Hamdia, Nelson. Are you with us?
Excellent, thank you. I will go ahead and kick it off and introduce the panel and the distinguished panelists that are joining us today, who I'm excited to get to see kind of in person. So welcome to the Spotlight panel on the entrepreneurial value chain approach, featuring an exciting group of panelists who you'll be hearing from shortly. My name is Elizabeth Hoffecker. I am a research scientist at the MIT D Lab in Boston, Massachusetts. Where I lead the local innovation research group, which focuses on understanding processes of innovation in a variety of community-based contexts around the world. So innovation not in the firm or in the university, but innovation in the community context. And in that capacity, I'm serving as the co-principal investigator for a multi-year collaboration project between MIT and Ashesi University, the Next Eye to Eye project, which you might have heard about. But briefly, this project has created a value-driven entrepreneurial incubator at Ashesi University that is aiming to train young emerging entrepreneurs who have incorporated outcomes driven by the SDGs into their business models. So kind of purpose-driven enterprise. And then connecting these young entrepreneurs to a broader entrepreneurial and innovation ecosystem in Accra and throughout Ghana. So that's where the members of this panel come into play. Starting in early 2020, right before the pandemic arrived, actually. The panelists with me here today, along with I think about 12 others, were invited by the Next Eye to Eye project to come together to form an entrepreneurial ecosystem task force, or as Gordon likes to say, design team, with the mission to really identify areas of the ecosystem that have high potential for strengthening and for kind of bringing them to the next level, and then identifying the relevant actors who can play a role in that ecosystem strengthening, and working to jointly develop a strategy for joint work around ecosystem strengthening to put the entrepreneurial ecosystem on a path to transformation over a finite period of time. So think the next 7 to 10 years. So the strategy that's emerged from this group's work over the past 10 months is the entrepreneurial value chain approach, which we'll be discussing on the panel. So just very briefly, for those unfamiliar with the value chain approach, in a nutshell, it's essentially understanding that in order to bring any kind of value into a system, into a market or a community, there are a range of different actors and activities that are required to create that end value. So the value chain is essentially the web of all of the different actors, resources, stakeholders that come together to produce this final value. And typically, a value chain is thought of with regards to the development of a particular product. But in this case, we're really thinking about the value chain with regard to the development of entrepreneurship. So the development of dynamic startups, the development of young entrepreneurs incorporating SDGs into their business models. So using a value chain approach for ecosystem strengthening and for really building that pipeline and that web of relationships that can launch the next generation of young entrepreneurs to hopefully to success. So with not much more ado, I'm going to go ahead and ask each of the panelists to briefly introduce yourself and the organization that you represent and the role that this organization is playing in the entrepreneurial ecosystem. And then just give us a little snapshot about why you're particularly excited about this value chain approach. We'll start with Nelson.
Hi, thanks, Elizabeth. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm excited to be a part of this conversation. So I'm from InnoHub. InnoHub essentially seeks to connect the dots between the demand and supply side of impact capital, where we, through our accelerator programs and growth consulting services, package these businesses to make sure they are what you would call investment ready, and to be able to engage impact capital, impact sources of funding for their business growth. In the same way, we also try to curate such conversations between the entrepreneurs and potential investors in the ecosystem, mostly in Ghana. Beyond that, so we also noticed that there was really the challenge of early stage financing, particularly angel investing, not so much prevalent in Ghana. So we also set up the Accra Angels network, basically to be able to bring together a group of individuals who really have some disposable income, but not really confident in the startups. So how do you make them understand the early stage investment and what it takes to do that? So we're currently building this cohort of angel investors who will be able to do very early stage investment. Whereas other markets are talking about the challenge of missing middle finance, we identify that in Ghana, it's not just missing mid, but also have the missing early. So early stage financing is very much absent, and we seek to support entrepreneurs to be able to do that. And happy to have worked with various people on this platform like Hamdia and Amma and Gordon, everybody here. I think we're doing quite some work together. And I'm happy to be a part of this conversation because about 3 years ago when we met at Merpa Capital in Samibua's office, there was myself, I think there was Amma, there was Letitia, there was Ruka, and the conversation was around the fact that you have lots of entrepreneurs jumping from one program to the other, one hub to the other. And I think that is basically because sometimes there's no continuum. You see people doing the same thing in silos, everybody is offering the same kind of services, but how do we have such conversations that would really drive on from further? If I go to point A for this service, from there I can go to point B, and I know there's going to be a top up and going to be different from what I have received from a previous place. So for me, this is a very important conversation in line of our work. Thank you.
Thank you, Nelson. I'll pass it off to Hamdia.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and good afternoon to all of you and the panelists. I'm really excited that this is happening. And I work for Ghana Venture Capital Fund. And we support early stage VC firms to invest in startups and small and medium enterprises in Ghana. And we have a mandate of building this VC ecosystem to encourage more equity type investments and equity type instruments to be able to support these businesses to grow and hand them over to private equity funds who have more money to be able to help them to scale and grow. And this is very important for me because I think that the value chain approach allows us to be able to work together and also allow us to focus on each individual's work, organization's work, so that we don't, as Nelson said, we are not competing, but we are working together. And that is what will enhance the efficiency and the effectiveness of the kind of services we are delivering to support the ecosystem. So I'm happy that this is happening. I think it's timely. If you are able to start now and start working together with this approach, we should be able to get somewhere as we are within a decade of action to achieve this.
Thank you, Hamdia. I'll pass it now to Amma.
Thanks, Elizabeth, and thank you to the organizers. So my name is Amma Jampo. I am co-founder of Scale Up Africa. We are a women-led business development agency based in Accra, and we are really focused on capacity building and growth within the ecosystem. So as Nelson said, a lot of us have been working informally together over the years, and I'm so pleased that we're at this point where we have something more structured that would guide us through to a design of something more sustainable for the ecosystem at large. Our focus is very much on gender and youth development, youth-led businesses, and so we work a lot with the tech sector and the agribusiness sector to really develop programs for our clients on a value chain basis. So, we have situations where we are upskilling some of the supply chain actors in some of our SME clients to then enable them to boost their, their sales on the demand side. So we are very happy to see this particular approach come out of the working and the, conversations we've been having over the past almost, I think, 10 months now. And I do remember us meeting up and, the next day was kind of, announcements about lockdown. So it seems like moons ago, but it's great that we were able to come together and have this as a next step in the journey.
Absolutely. It does seem like moons ago, doesn't it? I mean, this was supposed to be a breakfast club and turned into a Zoom club. Gordon, over to you.
All right. I hope you can hear me okay. Okay. All right. So Gordon Adomja, I'm an associate professor at Ashesi University. Mostly teach courses in sort of how to apply design to the front end of the entrepreneurial process. So in the development of new ideas, in the development of business models, and so forth. I also lead the Ashesi Design Lab, which helps students, faculty, and staff to take the design approach in solving problems. I also happen to be a co-PI on this project with MIT D-Lab, supported by USAID, called the Next Eye to Eye program. And I guess I'll talk a little bit about what the program is. The program is focused on 3 main areas under the broader title of accelerating local potential. So we're working with MIT to implement a more ethical way of doing research called lean research, which works really well with our mission of educating ethical entrepreneurial leaders. The second phase is starting a value-based incubator, as Elizabeth introduced. And by that, our tagline is hybrid entrepreneurship. So entrepreneurs that pursue commercial revenue and social impact in one unified strategy. So they don't do one and then do the other, but they do both as they move along. So we say that they do good whilst doing, they do well whilst doing good. The other way around, they do good whilst doing well. And then, of course, it's very clear to us that just throwing in an incubator is not enough. We need to think about the ecosystem around the incubator and how the entrepreneurial ecosystem can support the incubators that we are sort of helping, especially because they are focused on something that is it's not entirely new, but a little different: hybrid entrepreneurship, being intentional about commercial revenue and social impact at the same time. So for us, that is the point of interest for this value chain approach, because what we realized after 1 year of incubating a set of hybrid entrepreneurs, if you will, was that we realized we were not ready for acceleration. It wasn't surprising, we knew that, but it hit us in the face. And it was clear to us that given that there are so many incubators but very few accelerators, what it meant was that there were so many young entrepreneurs that are going through the mill and coming out and not being able to jump that valley of death into the next phase of their business. And so for us, having supported this project and help organize it, we think that the entrepreneurial value chain approach is definitely the way to go, because we can see how it can really build a bridge for our entrepreneurs from incubation to acceleration, so that the path is lined up a little bit more for them, and there's more promise in this whole process of entrepreneurship.
Well said, Gordon. And I think that's a perfect segue to our next topic, which really is looking a little bit at kind of what we understand works in a value chain approach from how these approaches have been used in more conventional value chains, not entrepreneurial value chains necessarily, but agricultural value chains, product value chains, service value chains, and kind of extracting some of those lessons about what works from a value chain approach into what this group will be doing, into the strategy for building an entrepreneurial value chain. So, a few of the things that that I've observed from my own research, I do quite a lot of case study research in South America and Central America, in East Africa, but not as much in West Africa, is that where value chain approaches have been used successfully, one of the keys is really that all of the actors in that value chain very clearly understand their role. And I think this was previously mentioned, right? That there's role clarity, so that people aren't trying, so that everyone isn't trying to do everything, but that people are really able to kind of be strength-based and asset-based and focus on what's the unique role, the unique capability that each organization can add. And then how does that assembly happen? How do those organizations assemble themselves into a a chain, a web of complementary roles so that there aren't big gaps, right? So that the entrepreneur or the bottle of wine or the bag of coffee, whatever it is that's moving through this chain, has a clear path and doesn't have, multiple roles competing to provide certain aspects of value, but also isn't facing a valley of death where they get to a part of the chain where there's no one, right? And so I think that's one of the important lessons that we see from, successful value chain approaches around the world. Another that I've observed is really the importance of not just the web of value, but the web of knowledge, and kind of how that knowledge infrastructure is built so that the actors in the value chain and the entrepreneurs moving through the value chain are all able to leverage the same knowledge. And this is a little bit getting back to lean research, right? So that there aren't actors who are kind of segmented or siloed out from important knowledge that they need. In a recent 2016 paper on barriers to innovation in Ghana by Bartels, Correa, and Vitali, this is a quote from them. They said, "The production, accumulation, and distribution of knowledge through institutions, networks, and assets of organizational, human, and social capital remain the salient characteristics of innovation. Knowledge remains the essential driving mechanism for economic and competitive advancement." So one thing to kind of think about is, what are those back-end infrastructures that allow for knowledge to not be siloed, but to be shared among the actors in the value chain, so that the knowledge that is there can be leveraged by all of the actors for the benefit of the entrepreneurs. So with that, I'll turn it over and kind of open it up to any of you who have had experience working on a value chain approach in other domains, kind of some lessons that you're pulling from that successful work into this entrepreneurial value chain work.
I'm happy to go. I work a lot with women in business, but agribusiness is one of our biggest, where we have most of our clients. And so with agri, everyone will tell you that you should start with the market first. You should have a buyer ready to kind of, take up your harvest, right? So we very much work with agribusinesses to make sure, okay, fine, from the seed to the marketplace, everything has been mapped out, so where to go for inputs, where to go for financing, where to go for processing, where to go, for someone to manage logistics, and then onto a marketplace for someone to distribute your product. And so that is very much an approach that we're very comfortable with, and we recognize that this is actually the way to go. So one of the examples of the things we're also doing is and like an agri park concept, where you have huge swathes of land and you have various actors on that piece of land, but then again, bringing their individual expertise along the value chain to make sure that everyone is as efficient as possible, as compared to the usual, 1 acre or 2 acres here and there, which is highly inefficient. So that's one way that we kind of apply the value chain approach in our day-to-day operations with our clients.
Excellent, thank you, Amma. Someone else from the group would like to hop in?
Yes,
Yes,
I will
I think,
just quickly add on to Hamdi. I'm happy to let you go first. I'll come after you, please. Thank you.
No, go ahead now.
Right, thank you. So just wanted to add on to what Amma said. I remember we had a client that was into maize farming in the north, and we had another client that was into poultry. So essentially what we supported this farmer to do in their processes, we got the logistics arranged, and once everything was harvested, it was bagged and sent straight to our client that was also into poultry farming. So there was that seamless transition from farm all the way to where it was needed. And there wasn't that hassle between the farmer trying to get markets for his produce or the poultry farmer trying to get maize to produce the meals for the feed for his farm or for his poultry. But just to also transition to how this is working or how we are applying a similar value chain approach in our work, just to give an example, we have an agri-tech accelerator program we're running, and there are various stakeholders who we've identified and worked with for this particular project. So first of all, there is the project funder, which is GIZ Make IT, and then we have the beneficiaries who are entrepreneurs. And most of the entrepreneurs we selected, actually about 80% have gone through various incubators. So before we launched the call, we had a conversation of KIC and say, you're doing incubation. We have this program that is very much investment readiness oriented. Can we have you market this to your startups who could now apply to be on? So we had a lot of these ventures from KIC coming on the program. And beyond our program, we also have a pool of mentors, about 5 business mentors, and then 2 technical mentors with field expertise who are working with these businesses and the whole program. And then we also have various funders who, beyond the program, you want to match these ventures to. So you have Absa, which is a bank that is looking to do investment in these businesses. We also have Wangara, which is a fund we sponsor. There's Accra Angels, plus a Switzerland-based fund that is looking to invest in some of these ventures. So clearly, we're looking at how various pieces of the market, right from the incubators to the business experts out there who could be coaches, and then we have the financing partners who we are basically matching them to. And we basically sit in the middle as an accelerator that's coordinating all of these components. So that's an example to share. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Nelson. And I don't know why we are all talking about agri, because it seems that is mostly what we have all done. I wanted to share our experience in terms of financing sorghum farmers in Ghana in 2006 to 2010. We were part of a whole long project where, you know, the value chain concept was being introduced, and our role was a financier, and we were very strict on our role just to provide the funding. But the project management team was excellent. They were working with the farmers. The farmers were producing the sorghum. The off-taker, which was Dennis, was ready to take whatever was produced. And we had these intermediaries, you know, warehouses where, and you know, they are, after harvesting, the aggregators will aggregate. You know, we fund the production, and then we fund aggregators, and then they aggregate, keep it in the warehouse. The transporters were ready as and when Guinness placed the order. Then they would load and send it to Kumasi, and then payment is done. We get our money, and you know, the rest of the value chain. So everybody sort of played their role that they are supposed to play, and there was a lot more efficiency in that. Because if you ask me to go and aggregate, I wouldn't know how to do that. So it's very important that, you know, everybody is able to play their role, and they are very focused on what they are doing. And as Nelson also mentioned, even within the financing, we see it as also a way of looking at it in the value chain, because financing, I mean, when somebody is starting, there is a way of funding the person, and then when you hand them over, right? You keep handing them over, so you start on your own. Somebody supports you, an angel investor. You move on to a VC, you know, and you move on to, you know, more on the debt side, getting to the bank. So when the value chain is not very clear, that is where you see that you meet a startup, a very early stage startup, and the person is looking for direct debt early. But at that point, maybe the person is not very ready for debt at that time. Maybe the person is ready for equity, you know, and what type of equity are you looking for? Because even when you get to the VC stage, you probably might have had an angel investor putting in something, or, you know, a group of friends or co-founders bringing their own capital base to start. So I think this value chain is very, very important, that we should begin to look at it within translating it into the entrepreneurial ecosystem in Ghana. We have done so much in different ways. Sometimes I feel that we are even competing with each other, and it doesn't bring out as much specialization as possible. But when you interact, all of us on this panel, we know each other, we work together. We all know the strength that everybody brings on this. And so if we all concentrate on what we could do, and we could do better, and try to support each other to deliver on what they are supposed to do, and focus more with clearly defined goals for each of the segments within the ecosystem, I am sure that, you know, eventually we'll get there, so that at least we are clear to run and finish the race in a good way.
Excellent. Gordon, something to add from your experience? I think it's interesting, Hamdia, that you mentioned ag, because Ag, I think, is one of the sectors where the value chain approach has been used most consistently and successfully around the world. It's also where I've researched it in my own research. So a lot of the exact examples are coming from Ag. And I think it provides a really powerful and clear analogy of what needs to happen in the entrepreneurial ecosystem, right? Because in Ag, it's quite clear what those different roles are, what those different stages are. You know, the aggregator, the physical space, that, you know, we can map out very clearly what that value chain needs to have in order for something that's grown to make it to market. And I think oftentimes what I see in entrepreneurial and innovation ecosystems is that that role map is a little less clear. You know, some of the roles are well defined, but there are some other roles that are quite essential that aren't as well defined, or that no one's playing. Right? So I'm going to pass it over to you, Gordon, to talk a little bit about from your work, you know, from this work in convening the group, perhaps what are some of the roles that are and sounds like someone needs to go on mute. What are the roles that are strong, and where are some places where the group in the brainstorming and the team design work might have identified gaps in roles or roles that need to be strengthened?
Right. So it's very clear. I think they've all touched on it. What we realize is that once you start incubating entrepreneurs and they basically test and validate their value proposition and business model, then they need to really replicate that business model in the market. And that's where it gets a little tough because of trust issues, because of investment, because of just operational difficulties. And I think this is where lining up channel members, you know, whether it's telecoms or investors, or, you know, as Hamdia was saying, aggregators, or warehousing people, or other people along the value chain, and basically putting them on notice that there are, you know, you have this group of entrepreneurs and so forth that are doing this, and in 9 months, this is going to be ready, and we will require you to do this, and then you can do some kind of negotiation. So what we're hoping to, what we found is that there are these gaps, and in fact, in terms of thinking about how to really build up the ecosystem for the next 5 to 7 years, it was very clear through the deliberations that these were the connections that needed to be made so that entrepreneurs have a smoother ride. Because if you think about other ecosystems, more sort of vibrant ones, you think of Silicon Valley and so forth, there are resources that young and upcoming entrepreneurs can tap into. There are angel investors. There are companies that are providing enterprise software that you can't afford, and so forth, that will help you build and test and validate your solutions. And you just don't have that here. So closing the gaps, you know, like Hamdia was saying, we all have been working, you know, we know each other, but we've been working in different aspects of the value chain, but sometimes in overlapping ways, there's a lot of overlaps. So why don't we string along our work so that it's almost like a domino effect, right? So this entity does work with this set of people, and then they know, the next entity knows that that this set of entrepreneurs are coming through these sectors, and they will need this type of mentoring and these coaches and so forth, and it just, you know, goes along a path of success. So we think that the real sort of magic is in that coordination, in lining up resources. And again, it's not to take out the hustle for the entrepreneur. The entrepreneur still has a lot of hustling to do, but it's to build the infrastructure, the bridges that they need to walk through to be successful.
Exactly. The infrastructure, and I think that that's one of the key pieces, kind of thinking about what's needed as concrete next steps, building on some of the work of the group. I know, as you mentioned, Amma, one of the things that you do in an agricultural value chain project, right, is you map the value chain first. You kind of actually, draw it, you diagram it, you kind of visualize it. So I'm wondering if that's one of the pieces that the group thinks is important, is a kind of a mapping of the entrepreneurial value chain. If that's already happened, perhaps you might speak to that about, are those mapping efforts in place? Are those mapping efforts on the horizon? And any other kind of immediate next steps, drawing from your work in agricultural value chains, that you would think, okay, well, if this were an agricultural value chain, here's how we would be going about it. So, for kind of translating that into the entrepreneurial value chain strategy. I'll just open that to anyone on the panel.
Yes, Elizabeth, let me just step in here to say that I think that as Gordon mentioned, the real key issue that we identified at our first two sessions was the fact that there are a lot of people doing different things, but similarly, in similar ways, and that we probably have to map and then begin to strengthen each of the acts, players within the ecosystem. So that at least when we strengthen that, it will be able to help us to work more efficiently. I mean, we are doing it. I've been in this sector for over 15 years, and a lot of my colleagues on this platform have been doing it. Early stage financing is not easy, and we also know that preparing entrepreneurs for funding is also not easy. And we have players. So how do we clearly define the roles of each of the actors within the ecosystem? There has been a bit of mapping. I think Andy, West Africa, did a mapping in Accra of entrepreneurship ecosystem in Accra. We could take a look at it. We could build on it so that we could have a countrywide kind of guide map. And then we begin to see the roles that each one is going to play and begin to design programs that can strengthen each of these roles in a more efficient way, and so that we can collaborate. So Nelson said something that was so very interesting. I was very happy to hear that because, we have, as a financier, I have mostly talked about the fact that our investor readiness program hasn't been too good. We need to have more accelerator programs because the incubation is happening, but people need to begin to go to market, learning by doing through acceleration programs. But accelerators also need funding, right? To be able to ensure that they deliver on these programs, people leave or graduate from this accelerator program with funding. So how do we begin to look at seed funding to be able to support this accelerator to do a really great job? Because if you come to an accelerator and there is no go-to-market fund for you to be able to really start, what is the point, right? So we need to be able to work that. But then acceleration is not incubation. So it's not the same. So everybody must be able to clarify their role well and say, look, we are incubated. We all know that incubation is not profitable. So are there going to be some sort of grant or some kind of program funding to support incubation, to support acceleration? We also know that the angel ecosystem, we need to strengthen it for very, very early stage investment. I mean, Nelson, have took upon themselves to set up the Accra Angel. I, together with Amma and friends of mine, have set up the Lady Angel Network. We only support women-led businesses, and we have the Ghana Angel Investor Network, which was led, by Venture Capital Trust Fund, very well managed by Letitia Brown. So we need to begin to piece these things together and begin to see where are the serious gaps that we can strengthen the key actors within the ecosystem to let it flow. It's a flow chart. So everybody must play their role. It shouldn't get to a point and it starts. And when it gets to a point and it starts, that is where the problem is. So let's have a way of ensuring that it flows, so that when it flows, then everybody becomes excited about the fact that their effort gets to an end. Because sometimes I feel pain when I speak to the business service providers, right? The accelerators, the incubators, that they've worked with entrepreneurs for a year, for 2 years, and there's no funding for such an entrepreneur. There is tiredness, and you see a lack of effort on your side, but it's not that because you haven't worked hard, it's just because the early stage funding ecosystem also needs to be tweaked. So I think those are the areas we have to begin to look at. And then we need to draw a key strategy and ensure that each player, whatever we need to do for each actor to ensure they focus on their role and do it well, is done so that we can have a proper flow and ensure that we achieve our target. Thank you.
Can I just jump in there? I think these are really valid points. Just really understanding what an ideal ecosystem would even look like in Ghana with a Ghana flavor, and then mapping all those out and understanding, okay, where's our impact hub, where's Scale Up Africa, where's iSpace, how does everyone fit in, and then we have a very clear picture as to where the gaps would be, and then we can move from there. But I definitely feel that the will is there. I think we have a very good core of people who have dedicated a lot of time and their experience to just connect the dots and figure out how we can proceed. So there's quite a bit of optimism from where we sit.
Yes, just the fact that this group has been meeting consistently is in and of itself a really important kind of linchpin to a strategy, right? It's very difficult to build an entrepreneurial value chain if the players in that value chain are not meeting regularly, right? And are not kind of engaging with each other and starting to do this strategy work and brainstorming, and also that, thinking from that one level up, right? It's oftentimes I see in some of the ecosystems that I research that each organization is thinking from the perspective of their organizational mandate, of course, right? And everyone's busy and everyone's trying to survive, but it can take a little bit of extra work to create that space to be able to think at the ecosystem level. Not just what does my organization need, but what does the ecosystem need? And how can I align my organization's vision, my organization's strategy, the direction that I'm moving as a leader of one of the players in this ecosystem with what the ecosystem needs, so that those things aren't at loggerheads, right? And so that the organizational imperatives are not contradicting or kind of clashing or competing with the overarching goal of the ecosystem, which is really a need for coordination, right? And oftentimes what we see is that, everyone agrees that collaboration is important, but in reality, like everyone wants to be the first over the finish line, right? so how, having a group where that perspective shift can occur and where the kind of 3,000-foot view can happen, or the meter view can happen, allows for a different perspective in terms of thinking on behalf of the and seeing kind of the ecosystem group as the stewards of an ecosystem strategy that kind of transcends and includes the individual strategy of each of the players. So with that perspective, I'm going to perhaps, Gordon, turn over to you the last few minutes to tell us a little bit about where you see the work of this group moving forward, kind of what are some of the next steps with this ecosystem design task force, if there are players who are interested in learning more, in figuring out how they can contribute to this ecosystem level view, kind of what those mechanisms might be. I'm just attaching here in the chat a brief publication that came out of D-Lab last year that I developed that provides kind of an ecosystem model with some of the key roles from the perspective of an innovation ecosystem specifically. But so that's just a resource that I'm going to drop in there. But yeah, it would be great to hear a little bit in closing, Gordon, about kind of where this is heading and next steps.
Thank you, Elizabeth. So I think, like you said, we started off as it was supposed to be a number of breakfast meetings, and then it became a number of monthly meetings. And so we're seeing real commitment on the side of these ecosystem players. These are very, very busy people. Hamdia, Nelson, Amma, Letitia, very busy people. And so we were stunned by the fact that they made time for us every month. So I think what we're going to do is to continue that, and then start to, we're going to pick a project or two, and maybe in agriculture or maybe in another sector. But definitely, I'm sure we're going to start with agriculture because there are a few people who are already working on agriculture projects in there. And then we're going to start to line up a path, stepping stones. I was on Asasi Radio with Letitia yesterday, and she used the word stepping stones, the phrase. And we think that's the idea, this idea of stepping stones, and then having each of the players be the stone that the entrepreneurs are going to step on into success. And so what we would like for others to do if they're interested is to come be a stepping stone, right? And then we'll figure out where to place you along that path. So that's one, putting together a number of of people who provide services and training and resources, who can, piece together to form this puzzle. And then the second part is research, because there's a lot of information in the space that can help us get a better understanding of how to do this well and how to then take it to the next level. So Ashesi University is going to provide some research support in that vein, because we see ourselves being able to sort of build up whatever we have now into some kind of entity in the future. I'm opining here, so I don't have, I don't want to make it sound like we have it all figured out, but we're hoping that we will start with the stepping stones together, a project or two, with the players that are involved now, add more stepping stones, and then launch a bigger initiative that then maybe connects with a number of hubs and incubators. And the goal here, obviously, is to make sure that we close that gap between incubation and acceleration, where we don't have a lot of young people going through incubator programs and then being stuck at the end because there are no resources. And in fact, it's not just money, right? It's also the other, value chain players who can continue to hold these ideas up as they continue to be validated. So this is what we really hope will happen. Stepping stones, add more stepping stones, and then add research so we can build a bigger initiative down the line. Over to you, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Gordon. I'm going to just open it up to see if anyone else on the panel has some closing thoughts around kind of next steps and direction moving forward in our last couple of minutes.
Yes, I think just a few, closing thoughts. Very fantastic remarks by Gordon, Hamdia, and everybody else. I just wanted to add that once there is that interest for collaboration, I think we've, like you said, we've gone through a journey of about close to a year, which is showing that interest. The next step really is about that intentionality, anchored on the question, what is the end game? How does success look like for the ecosystem? Placing entrepreneurs in the middle of definition of success, really, that would begin to inform and influence how we conduct our business as ecosystem players. If you are picking an entrepreneur in a very early stage and their success is your priority, what is the end game, then really that looks at how you can plug them into those who are doing later stage support. If you're at the later stage and your ultimate interest really is the end game, how do you now go down to those in the very early stage and plug in? And how do you also bring on those who would come after you and provide this kind of correlated or interrelated support system for support functions for entrepreneurs? So I think as an ecosystem, really, we need to have that intentionality and really be driven by the end game as in success for the ecosystem. And that really would bring a bigger result over the medium to long-term horizon. Just to chip in that. Thank you.
Absolutely. I think to wrap things up, that's a really keen observation, because what I've definitely seen from my research, and I think I've shared that with some of you, is that the ecosystems that really thrive and that distinguish themselves on the global scale. So if you think, Tel Aviv and ag tech, if you think Silicon Valley, if you think any of these ecosystems that really have thrived, it's because they have a clear vision around what that end game looks like. They have a sense of what kind of entrepreneurs, what kind of businesses that ecosystem is going to be producing 10, 15, 20 years from now. And they reverse engineer it, right? They think if we want to produce whatever it is, high growth startups or, sustainable ag enterprise or, the next generation of blended value entrepreneurs, whatever that end game is, if that's what our ecosystem is producing 15 years from now, what do we need to do to get there, right? And so it's just kind of reverse engineering that success path exactly as you have described, and really having clarity about what that end game is, and trying to have that be as specific as possible, right? So that it's not someone else's end game, it's really Ghana's end game. It's the end game that is unique, that's building on strengths, that's asset-based, and that's a place where this ecosystem can shine in a way that's unique, so that it's not a replica of some other ecosystem somewhere else, right? That's really, I think, an ingredient for success. So on that note, I think I will thank you all warmly for your participation in this panel, for sharing with us the journey that you've been on over the past almost year together, the digital journey. And I think that we will, be looking forward to seeing how this evolves in the coming year. I know this work is continuing, so it's a path that we're on that's just kind of in the midpoint, we're with the launch of this strategy. So Letitia, I will pass it back to you. Thanks, everyone.
Elizabeth and Hamdia, Nelson, Amma, Gordon, thank you. That was truly a really insightful session. Even though I've been part of this 10-month process, I think I also learned a couple of new things myself. So thank you very much for your contributions. Before you check out, I do have a couple of questions for you. And I think maybe this goes to Elizabeth. Are there any reference resources to read about the entrepreneurial value chain approach? So where can people get more literature?
That's a great point. I think that we will probably be sending them to Gordon as the reference point. So I do have a couple of research papers, not that I've written, but that others have written that I've incorporated in my research. Gordon, I'll be sending those to you so that you can put them up on the Next I2I page as kind of I imagine we will have a resource section on this entrepreneurial value chain approach that will include resources produced by this group, which won't be immediate, but will be happening at some point, outputs from the group, but then also inspiration. So research that we're looking at from other parts of the world that are informing the approach. So I'll kick that ball to Gordon.
Right, and I just put in the chat the web link to the Next I2I page. So it's nexti2i.com, and we'll be putting up a page that talks a lot more about the entrepreneurial value chain approach and how to participate. So it's nexti2i.com.
And Letitia, kind of as a wraparound to that question, in the chat, I did link to a research document that I published through DLab that is not about the value chain approach specifically, but it's one level up. So it's about kind of a more general approach to innovation and entrepreneurship and strengthening, drawn from a variety of literature and innovation systems and entrepreneurship ecosystems around the world. So that's kind of the research base that's informing this more specific strategy. If people are interested, I put the link in the chat, and Gordon can also probably include that in the webpage for the program.
Yeah, we'll do that.
So much. So yes, you can go to the Next I2I website, nexti2i, as in the number 2i.com, to get more information. And I guess as the process moves along, we'll be updating people accordingly. So just before the team leaves, we actually wanted to officially launch the value chain approach today. So any other ecosystem builders, support organizations that are on the line, any other business development support organizations, financiers, facilitators, whatever field or sphere you may be operating in, we're officially open. And I take this as the official launch of the entrepreneurial value chain approach. Gordon, would you like to add a few words? Any of my other colleagues want to add a few words?
No, I think you got it. The entrepreneurial value chain approach, EVC approach, is hereby launched. You can have a virtual clap to that. That would be from me, and I'll see if the others want to add to that.
Thank you very much.